Sounds good.
Yes, it is I, your humble host, Bill Hatch, the third, coming to you live from the palatial studios of Bald Spots Productions here in the beautiful city of Irvine, California, bringing you yet another episode of Not Quite After Midnight. Joining me from a more than acceptable safe social distance through the miracle of telephony are my guests. This evening I have returning for a second time because he just didn't get enough punishment before is Zachary Hagen, author of let's see if I remember, Eternity's Well?
Eternity's Well,
Yes!
Eternity's Mirror, and coming out this next month, Eternity's Refuge.
Eternity's Refuge. Ooh, coming soon to bookshelves near you. Hopefully. And
yes.
And joining us for the first time, which means he doesn't know any better, is Tommy Schnurmacher. Am I saying that right?
Right. Yes, you are.
Also an author, a Hungarian-born Canadian, and babysitter to the famous. And we'll get into that and other stories as the night proceeds. How are you gentlemen doing?
Pretty good. Yourself?
Doing all right. Celebrated my roommate's retirement earlier today, so I'm a little dry mouthed, if you know what I mean. But a little bit of ginger should clear that up.
Sure.
Anything interesting going on in the news?
Oh, there's lots going on in the news, but do we want to be depressed
Let's
tonight
have a good
or have
time.
a good time?
Yeah, I was thinking. Yes, I was thinking the same thing. I was watching some on television what's happening in the States. I watched about an hour of it. And I was saying to friends, do we really want to watch this? I mean, it goes from bad to worse. Yeah. And I'm sitting right now in a country spot in the eastern town. The Canadian geese are ready to flee here, to head down in your direction, to head south. And to hear the noise of the geese and the trees and the lake and everything, that was a lot more cheerful than watching what's on the news.
It definitely sounds that way. Yeah, the Canadian geese do stop over here on their way elsewhere. They don't stay here. They're pretty smart that way.
Right. Yeah, and I don't watch the news that much. I get most of my news from the internet, but I prefer to just kind of live life and only really participate in politics when I have to go and vote.
Oh yeah, no kidding.
That I'd like to ignore it.
Yeah, just enough to be able to get by and do your part and all that good stuff. But yeah. So let's see. So Zachary, you got Eternity. Wait a minute. Which one is it? This Eternity's Refuge.
Eternity's Refuge.
Eternity's Refuge is coming out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That is awesome. How long did it take you to write that?
The actual writing process took me about 7 months.
Wow.
The editing process was a little bit of a beast because we had some big changes this summer that got in the way of getting it done. It was actually supposed to come out last week was my original plan, but scheduling conflicts and taking on a new teaching job got in the way of actually getting it done by the deadline.
What are you teaching?
Ironically, I'm actually teaching math now.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Big departure for me. I'm taking a few classes to finish up my certification in that. But yeah, I am teaching math at a private school in rural Mississippi. It's kind of serene, actually, because there's almost nothing around us. We're out in the country, and
wow.
Great students. It's a relatively small school.
How old are kids?
They're high school students. So I have a range from about 14 to 18.
Nice. Private school, so I'm guessing they're reasonably well behaved.
Oh, we have issues just like any other school, but I will say not nearly as much as I've seen in public schools.
Yep, that's for sure. And let's see, where are people going to be able to find Eternity's Refuge?
Charity's Refuge will be available on Amazon exclusively for the first month and a half.
Okay, cool.
And then it will be available pretty much anywhere they want to order it.
Awesome. We'll put that. We'll be sure to put that link up in the description, provided you give it to me. That is, if you want to promote
it'll be linked on the website. So the pre-order hasn't gone live yet. It's processing, but it will be live on my website probably by tomorrow afternoon.
Sweet. Okay. Live resale. The website. Okay. Sweet.
So tell me about your projects, Tommy.
Well, my project, I mean, I'm a retired radio talk show host. I was also a gossip columnist. And I wrote a book called Makeup Tips from Auschwitz, How Vanity Saved My Mother's Life, which is a memoir about myself and my relation to my mother, and like the strange and offbeat relationship it was, because Holocaust survivors are very overprotective of their children. Because they think something terrible might happen. And one of my earliest memories, I was born in Hungary, and when we fled Hungary in the middle of the night and escaped to Austria, and then came to Canada. When we came to Canada, I was going to school, and one day my mother says that I can't go to school because it's too cold outside. And I said, well, why are the other kids all going to school? And she says, that's because Canadian parents don't love their children. and like, I believed it. And a few years later, again, as a Canadian kid, what do you want to do? You want to go skating, right? Play hockey. So my father buys me a pair of skates. And my mother says, okay, if he will go skating, that's fine. He will go skating. Maybe he will fall. He will hurt his head. He will crack his head open, crack his skull open. The blood and the brains, the red blood and the brains will soak into the eyes. As I'm listening to this, if I'm not going out on the, I'm not going out on the ice. I'm terrified to go skating. To this day, I do not know how to skate. I do not know how to bowl. I don't know how to ride a bike. And I don't know how to drive a car. All
you don't
because
know how to drive a car.
No, don't have a driver's license, do not know how to drive a car, all because of the over protection. And it works both ways. When I call her up and she didn't answer on the phone first few rings, that must mean she died. So I have to call the police. When I came home late from high school, one day I'd won a little scholarship and was picking up a gift certificate at the downtown department store. And when my friend's mother was driving us home, I heard my name on the radio that I've been missing for a week. My friend's mother says, where have you been all week? I said, at home. Go to school and at home. Well, why are they saying you're missing? And so we get home, and my mother said, oh, thank God he's alive. Why did you tell the police your son was missing? My mother says, you think if I tell them he's late 2 hours, they're going to go look for him? So that was the kind of mom that I had to deal with. And but she gave me lots of guts and courage and chutzpah. She survived the death camp of Auschwitz. She survived walking across the border in the middle of the night to escape guts and nerve. And one of the things, that Bill mentioned at the beginning about babysitting for the famous, I heard that John Lennon and Yoko Ono were in Montreal for a bed-in for peace. And so I called a friend and said, let's go downtown and see John Lennon, see one of the Beatles. And she said, don't be ridiculous. There'll be thousands of people there and security and everything. I said, so then we'll go home, give it a shot. We get down there, downtown Montreal, the Queen Elizabeth Hotel. No kids, nobody on the street, no security inside. We heard they're on the 17th floor. We pressed the buzzer. She's about to press the 18th floor. We're on the 17th floor. She wants to press 17. I said, no, you can't do that. Press 18. We go one floor higher, go down the stairs. And I had a fake press pass with me, some crayons, because I knew that Yoko's 6-year-old daughter, Kyoko, was with her. And just as we get to the door, a security guy has this hand on the back of my shirt and is about to throw us out. The door opens. Yoko's there with little Kyoko. And the security guard says, "I'm sorry, madam, we're going to throw these people out right away." And the little girl, Kyoko, chimes in, "Can I have those crayons?" I said, "Well, not if we're being thrown out." And Yoko says, "No one's being thrown out. These are our friends. Come in." So we go into the suite where John Lennon and Yoko are, and she says to us, "Would you like to meet John? Do you know what that's like for a teenager during the height of like Beatlemania? Would you like to meet John?" So we got to meet him and interview him. And I felt sorry for the little kid, 6 years old, stuck in this hotel room. And so I said, "You know what? I have a kid sister the same age. Maybe I can take her out to play in the park together." Yoko says yes. And get this, they give us their 6-year-old daughter to take care of. They don't ask for our names, not our phone number, not identification. They have no idea who we are. Can you imagine? That wouldn't happen anymore. So we go play with her. We have a great time, bring her back and forth, back and forth. And we had a lovely time. They paid us $150 for babysitting services. And get this, what happens at the end. At the end, I have an autographed picture of John and Yoko. And Gail, who I went with, my friend, she sees the lyrics to "Give Peace a Chance" there with the empty wine bottles.
Okay.
So she takes the lyrics of "Give Peace a Chance," and many, many years later, she sold those lyrics at Christie's at the auction house in London for £350,000.
Wow.
So I got the autograph photo. She got the £350,000.
That seems fair.
Yeah. So a friend of mine suggested that I should sue her for it. I talked about it on the radio, and I didn't go through with the lawsuit. And because of that, I feel very proud because I'm the one who avoided a war over "Give Peace a Chance."
Now that would have been funny.
Yeah.
Maybe that can be the name of your next book, "The War Over
Could
Give
be.
Peace a Chance."
Avoiding war. Well, I've written an article called "Avoiding War Over Give Peace a Chance," but the whole book came about, and I want to ask you, Zachary, how your book came about. The way my book came about is one of the guys at the radio station I worked for, a guy who'd been there for a long, long time, one of the old veterans. During the commercials, I tell him stories like I just told you about my mom, and he says, "These are such funny stories. One of these days, you're going to have to write a book about all of these stories." And I did. And it's funny, like I can't do anything unless I have a deadline. I'm always early, but I can't do anything unless I have a deadline. And when I worked for the Gazette, with the Montreal paper, I had a deadline. On the radio station, I had a deadline. But writing a book, you don't have a deadline. Whenever you get it done.
Give yourself one.
Right. So you know what I did? I was in a little bookshop in downtown Montreal, and I said, "I've got it." I said, "I'm going to make a vow in public on Facebook that I will have 500 to 1,000 words up by noon every day, 5 days a week for the next 5 or 6 weeks." And because I felt that pressure, that's how I actually got it done.
Wow.
What method do you use? Like, what was the genesis for your book, and how do you motivate yourself?
The genesis for my book, I've talked about that in so many different interviews at this point that it's kind of old hat, but it was just kind of a mishmash of different little pieces of inspiration. I think the biggest thing was that I felt like a lot of fiction had gone the way of being so political and not so much uplifting and edifying and kind of touching those true transcendental things like an art should. So I wanted something like that. Now I'm hearing my echo. Let me turn myself down, just in case. So beyond that, the system I use is similar to yours. I need larger chunks or I procrastinate. So I try to do anywhere 1,500 to 3,000 words a day when I'm in the middle of actually writing the book. I don't hit it every day, but that helps me to actually get the first draft done, usually between 4 and 6 months. Yeah.
Quite the commitment.
It's a lot of commitment, but it works for me. I mean, I will say Eternity's Refuge was a lot harder to write than the first 2 books.
Is it a novel?
It is a series of novels. It's a fantasy series, and it answers kind of some of the big questions. There's a huge religious mythology within it. So I think of it kind of as a modern take on the Chronicles of Narnia or the Lord of the Rings sort of thing, because I was really inspired by both C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien and their immense mastery of the craft of fantasy writing and how they were able to say more than just what the story said. There's a lot of subtext and rich symbolism in their writing, and I wanted to do something like that as well. But yeah, it's a series of novels. It's going to be a 5-book arc. I've started plotting the 4th one now, so I'm excited about it. And
great.
Yeah, but the 3rd book was hard to write because of sort of the progression of things. You know, things have to get worse for your characters before they get better in a novel. And since this is kind of the midpoint of the series, things are really starting to kind of get awful. And I've spent so much time with these characters now that I love them like family, and it hurts to hurt them.
Wow. Yeah, they become real. They almost behave by themselves. They do things of their own volition. You ever get that feeling as you're writing?
To a certain extent, yes. Particularly with a couple of the characters really surprised me because I had planned for one direction, and then the biggest twist in the book came to me while I was writing one day, and I was like, this connects everything that I was struggling to make work in the plot. That changes everything. And it was very in line with one character's motivations and their ideas on how they like to do things. And it changed the entire book, but it's a much better story for it.
I was talking with a friend the other day and saying something that she found very controversial. I said that there's no such thing as writer's block. And she said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "I try to write, and sometimes I can't think of anything. That's writer's block." And I said, "You know what? Plumbers go to work. They don't have plumber's block or dentist block or optician's block." She said, "What do you do? Like, if you don't feel like you can write anything?" I said, "The solution to a writer's block is to deposit the tush on a chair, right, in front of a computer or a typewriter and start writing. Let's say you write, I can't think of a single thing to write today. Well, you've overcome writer's block because you've put words on paper. Then you say, well, I'm really annoyed about this because of this." Or then you can think of a prompt. Sometimes what I do is I take I close my eyes without even looking. I reach over to the bookshelf, take out a book, open it without looking which page, go to something in the middle of the page, a line, and just look at that line and say, okay, write something about whatever that line is about. And then you start writing that. It may have nothing to do with what you're writing about. It may have nothing to do with your project at the time. But, well, now you're sitting and typing, and it will come writer's block. And I've compared it to, because she says, oh, she hates her stuff. As soon as she starts writing, she thinks it's terrible. And I said, you know what you're like? I said, it's like Rodin, the sculptor. He's going downstairs to the basement to get a lot of clay, brings up the clay, looks at us. Oh, this looks terrible. This is terrible. That's so ugly. I guess I can't do anything. No, then he starts to work with it and make something out of it. As writers, it's the same thing. We put stuff out there, like throw stuff onto the page, and then No, that's then later on in the editing process. No, that doesn't make sense. I've got to change that, or I should add that, or I should subtract that. That comes later. But you have to give yourself, Zachary, I'm sure you go through too. Like you have to silence your editor, at your private editor at the beginning. First, is just to get the creative stuff, just to get stuff out there, out of your brain onto the page, and then work with it.
Yeah, I had to make a rule for myself that I don't read my books at all until I'm doing the proofreading at the end.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Because if I start reading it, that I'm tweaking it and changing little bits of the story, and then suddenly I remember when I was writing my first book, that's when I had to put the rule in place, because I would finish a chapter and then I'd go back and edit it. But then I was like, oh, I could go back and change this a little bit more. And I'm like, I'm not getting anything new written. So I had to make a rule that I don't read anything that I've written until the entire first draft is done. And sometimes not even then. I had to do a little bit more reading with this last book, because I actually had to rearrange a few chapters to fix some continuity errors that I didn't realize were there. So I had to rearrange some of the scenes, but that was something for the editing process. It wasn't while I was writing the project.
Yeah, editing is way easier than writing, in my opinion. I've done a little bit of editing in the past, primarily dissertations and other academic works. And when I try to write something myself, I have to, along those veins, I have to tell myself, just write. Stop editing. Because otherwise, like you said, Zachary, you never get anything done.
Yeah, I mean, you can edit a sentence until it's perfectly manicured and it's awesome, but it's one sentence.
Yeah. Right.
And I would rather have like 10 so-so sentences done, in the space of like, a couple minutes, rather than one great sentence, because then how am I going to feel following it up with something that is now just as bad as the first version of the other sentence was? But I want to go back to what you said about writer's block. I agree with the premise that writer's block doesn't exist, but I have a little bit of a different take on it. Every time I felt stuck in a writing project, for me, it's not so much that I don't know what to write. For me, when I encounter writer's block, it's because I'm going in the wrong direction and I'm not, and then the characters aren't doing what authentic to them. So I don't think writer's block is a thing where you can't write. It's that you're trying to make the story do something that feels natural and your brain is stopping.
Right.
Like senses of discomfort. So it's probably a little bit of both, but that's how I've always approached it when I'm. It's like, okay, story would be better going another way. So before figuring that out with one chapter in my first book, and that's kind of how I discovered that you can, at least I can't speak here, but I think a lot of times we want to in as right. But as much as we have free will, sometimes the characters do too. And they have to feel authentic on the page. Otherwise, we're just moving pieces on a chessboard.
What's intriguing, something happened to me in terms of what you'd write for a character in a novel or a play. I'm on the board of an organization called the Foundation for Genocide Education. And one of the people, one of the ladies who founded it, her mother was a Holocaust survivor, and she wrote a book about her experiences. And so these things, it's important that the subject be taught in high schools across Quebec and across Canada. So that's what
everywhere.
And that's what the organization does. It's starting in Quebec and Canada and going to the States, etc. And she was telling me about her her mom. I met her mom, like a fascinating woman and a real, strong woman and very dedicated to educating people, educating young people, and speaking to groups all over the place. And as they were giving me a lift back, a ride back home from our board meeting, she says to me, she asks me, the head of the organization, did your parents fast on Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur is the Jewish high holiday, and it's the holiest day of the year, and everybody fasts. And I said, well, yes, they did. And she tells me, oh, my mother never fasted, my father never fasted, and they told us not to fast. I said, wow, really? She said, yes. She said, the reason was because they fasted enough during the Holocaust, during the war. And I thought to myself, wow, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I'd never encountered anybody who'd said that before. So I'm just saying that no matter, you hear people saying things that you don't expect them to say, that seem to be completely out of character, and it's part of the fascination of life, that you learn something new from the most amazing places, whether it's on a show on YouTube or somebody you bump into at the supermarket will say something very unusual. Like, you'll often hear people say exactly what you expect them to say, but every now and then they'll be, wow, I never thought of that before, or I never saw it that way before. I was just speaking to another friend on the issue of life, and she's very anxious about everything. She's anxious about what's happening in the States. She's anxious about climate change. She's anxious about Vladimir Putin. She's anxious about her health, and she's concerned about all of these things, and she's concerned that people aren't concerned about these things. And so I said, do you have any like happy moments? Right? I mean, there's a lot of negativity, a lot of words. Do you have any happy moments? And she says, yes, but my mother told me that if I'm happy, that means I won't be happy afterwards. So when I'm happy, I'm worried that something bad will happen. So I said, let me get this straight. So you're either unhappy and worried, or if you're happy, you're thinking something's going to happen that's going to make me unhappy and worried. So you're never happy for a moment at all. And wow, that's a pretty heavy duty stuff. And I suggested she might want to look at I think it's called neuro-linguistic programming. It's like biofeedback. Like, you look at your brain when you think of something positive, and what lights up, and you look at your brain, what lights up when something's negative, and you can learn how to control it. It's the equivalent of having like wanting to do something on a computer and you're not allowed to touch the cursor, so you can't move anything around. But with this biofeedback, what happens is you can move it around. So, okay, I think positive, that's the way it looks. It looks negative, this is the way it looks. And so it helps get you out of like a downward spiral of negative thinking. So I suggested that to her, and she registered for it. I don't know how the course went because she just signed up, but I figured it might.
Yeah,
it might help.
NLP helped me get over some PTSD I had from an accident many years ago, and yeah, it can definitely work if you do it right.
Right, because it's so important, and I guess you learn this as you get older, right? That you're so busy worrying about what my next book is going to be, what is going to happen, can I pay the rent, like worries, that you forget that, never mind all of that in the future. Right now, this second, is there something beautiful around? Is there a nice lamp near you? Did you have a nice warm, nice hot cup of coffee? Like, you ignore all of the beauty for worrying about the future, and it's you really, it's a cliche, but it's so true. You really do have to stop and smell the roses, and it takes you a while to get to a certain age to be able to do that. And the thing is, even if you're in a tough situation, I remember when my mother was sick every now and then and have to call the ambulance, and like, instead of panicking, like being in a state of permanent panic, I said, stop for 30 seconds right? Put everything on hold. You've already called the ambulance. They're on their way. Put everything on hold and look at the couch and the color of the yellow flowers on the couch for just the 30 seconds.
Grounding techniques.
And that's exactly what it's called, Zachary. You're right. Grounding technique can make a world of difference. And then you get back to whatever's going on in your world, etc. But it takes a while to figure these things out. Like there's no instruction book that comes with these tips. You sort of have to figure them out as you go along.
I would maybe disagree with that, but I think that depends on your worldview and where you are in terms of religion, whether it's, whatever it is. But I think that there are kind of instruction books, and some of them work and some of them don't, in terms of finding that kind of peace.
Oh, that's true. Oh, I see what you mean. Yes, there's no instruction. You're right. There are many instruction books for life. What am I talking about? Yes. Yeah, religion and many religions provide you with a very precise instruction book about how to do absolutely everything.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's very true. I've had a lot of people talking to me about biblical and Torah law recently, which is interesting. I'm not personally Jewish, but I'm fascinated by well, one of them being Yom Kippur, because I know that just recently happened. Yes.
Right.
And I don't actually know a whole lot about many of the Jewish festivals, except for Yom Kippur and Passover, at least in terms of how they were celebrated during the times when they were first instituted. I know more about that than how they're celebrated in modern times.
Uh-huh. Well, the thing is, I know about a lot more about what they're celebrating in modern times, but I don't know enough about the history of them. But you know what I thought about just recently? I just clicked onto a news program, and there's this 85-year-old lady, very, very proud of herself in her robe and her mortar hat. She got herself a Bachelor of Arts degree at age 85. And I thought,
Sure.
how cool, like, how cool is that? She could have been sitting home. Oh, I'm too old. I'm too old. How much time have I got left? Old age is horrible. My hip hurts, my back hurts, whatever, all those things. No, she decided to go out to York University and learn how to use a computer and learn how to use Zoom. She said everybody in the IT department knew her by name. And I said, like, what an incredible role model. What a fantastic thing. So why complain? You're too old. And this is something interesting that my mother told me that her mother told her. Message from her grandmother. I'd love to know what you think about this. She said, if we took whatever our problems are and put them in a bag and then went to the public market and put them out on a table, all our problems, laid them out on the table, and everybody else in town and the village was there, and they put all their problems out on the table. When we looked around and saw what everybody else's problems were, we'd pack up our problems, put them back in the bag, and take them home. In other words, that like you'd find that, you know what? Yes, I have all those problems, but what other people have, some of the problems other have are even worse. Like I'd rather deal with the ones that I do. One of the issues that I think about is getting older. That's something I'm conscious of. But I thought about this friend of mine who's like in a very negative vibe, in a negative space, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. She's 14 years younger than I am. So would I change if I could switch and be her? Now I'm 14 years younger. That's 14 extra years, right? 14 years younger, but I'd have to live her life. And I said, absolutely not. I wouldn't. Not even for those extra 14 years. So whatever you have, there's somebody out there who has it worse, right?
It's an interesting concept. I don't necessarily think that anyone has it worse or better, at least not for every situation, because of course we talk about things like, well, your mother's an Auschwitz survivor, which is such an amazing story. Obviously, you don't compare things to that, but I think that a lot of times it's that we're more familiar with our own problems. We're aware of the situations, and so it's a known entity. Whereas, like, I'm a high school teacher, right? So I see my students and their problems, and I'm like, oh, that's easy to deal with. I could deal with that just fine. But then I remember, and I have to check myself, and no, I was in high school. I had
Yeah,
these same problems, and at the time they were the end of the world for me
they're
because
immense.
I
Yeah.
had, I had no frontal lobe. I was a mess of hormones and changing and worrying about grades and all of these other things. And I'm like, you know what? Because I think there is an element of truth to that. We don't really want to switch problems with people. I can objectively say that my problems are probably worse than my students' problems are, at least in terms of the ones that I see on a daily basis.
Right.
But I'm also equipped to deal with them.
But
So
the other thing is with social media is like somebody will take a picture, right?
yeah,
On on Snapchat or whatever, but like they're on a paddleboard on the lake and what a perfect life they have. You don't see that the next minute they could have fallen and broken their leg, and like those little snapshots are just that, the little snapshots. It's not an indication of life being terrific or great, or it's a moment in time. And so we often judge like our own bad moods with their picture of they're busy on a cruise ship and say, oh, look at that, they have that and I have this situation. You don't see the full picture. Whose full picture do we really see? Our own. We're very familiar with our own full picture.
yes,
It's harder to know the full picture of everyone else, and what you see on the surface, that's not it. It's like people on radio would always say, like, I always wonder what people, you're on radio, what you look like. I said, this is what you have to do. If you hear someone on radio and you wonder what they look like, whatever you think they look like, it's not that. If you think they're tall and blonde, they're not tall, they're short, they're not blonde, they're the opposite. Whatever you have in your mind, that's not them. Somehow that's a rule that works. But you're right, and also your own problems. I mean, are the ones that matter to you. And that's one of the issues that comes up with children of Holocaust survivors. Like, how could I say that I had a problem, whatever it was in high school, and tell my mother my problem in high school? Right. I mean, after knowing what she went through, I'm not going to, like that's my problem is nothing compared to hers. You think to yourself, but that's not true at all. Your problem is something. It's very something. It's very important to you. And Holocaust survivors often have a tough time with children, and they have a tough time with boundaries. And what happens is you start parenting your parent. You become like, I translated English for them. Like, they didn't speak English, so I would translate documentation. I'd deal with officials, all that. That's not what you should be doing. The job of a child is to be a child. It's not to protect the parents and make sure that they're well brought up and that everything's okay with them.
yes.
Your job is to play. Your job as a kid is to play and learn and make mistakes, and the parents are there to teach you and protect you, etc. And I found and I talk about it in the memoir, is I found I was doing a lot of parenting them at like a very, very early, very, very early age, which is not a good thing.
That's interesting. Part of what, and I hope that this comes across well. I did a lot of reading about the Holocaust and those things when I was in grade school and beginning of high school. I actually taught Night by Elie Wiesel to my grade students one year when I was teaching English. And it was interesting hearing about his experience with his change in faith and understanding of that through his experience. And I saw kind of this dichotomy in all that I read. A lot of the Jewish people grew stronger in their faith, and a lot of them kind of left it. If you don't mind me asking, what was your parents' experience with that?
I don't mind you asking at all, because my father was a rabbi, and his constituents the people who survived, the Hungarian Jews were the last ones to be killed, over 400,000, right at the end of the war in 1944. And the Hungarian Jews who fled after the Hungarian Revolution, came to Montreal, came to Canada, were divided into two groups. One group was were extremely Orthodox before, extremely religious, and stayed that way. The other group went completely in the other direction and wanted to have nothing to do with organized religion. My father was the rabbi for those ones who had wanted to have nothing to do with organized religion. So when he arranged for high holiday services, right, they figured, well, no one's going to come. Your group, they're not religious. They're not interested. They came. They packed the place. And why? Because for cultural reasons, because it reminded them of home. It reminded them of their mom and dad. It reminded them of family. It was the similar songs that they remembered, speeches that they remembered, turns of phrase they remembered. So that's why they came. That's why they came to see him for cultural reasons. But in terms of, you're right, Ellie was always right. Some became more, their faith deepened, others discarded their faith entirely. This reminds me of a story, because my mother was in charge of selling the tickets for those high holiday services. And one day, this lady calls up and she says, I want to buy a ticket for the high holiday services, but I don't want to come all day for the whole thing. I want to come for just the 15-minute prayer, the memorial prayer. That's all. How much is a ticket if I come just for the 15 minutes? And my mother says, before I answered the question, did you see the movie Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton? I love that movie. I love that movie so much. It's so romantic, especially when Elizabeth Taylor is kissing Richard Burton. If I want to go to the movie theater and see just the love scene, how much is the ticket? She was the one who made sure that my father couldn't deal with money, didn't want to have anything to do with money. It was mom who did all the financial arrangements, and she was the one who made sure that we made a living, that he made a living, and then we could pay the rent and have food on the table. So, but their take as far as religiosity was, as far as I was concerned, they told me it's totally up to me, that whatever I decide is fine with them, and I shouldn't do it because I would think they want me to be in a certain way. You decide where you are in terms of faith, and whatever you choose is fine with me. Which is a great thing, great message to get from parents.
I would agree. I think that sharing the teachings and sharing the tradition is so important. But ultimately, the God of the Bible and the Torah forces his will on others. He's one that invites and beckons. So I don't think it would be right of parents to force someone to choose something, because that goes against the nature of of Yahweh.
So often,
right, and also the sorry,
that's okay.
The theme of Rosh Hashanah, the high holidays, is like you're crowning God as king, and you're choosing him to be the king, and you make this choice each year. It's not that he imposes himself. Listen, I'm going to be he wants to be invited in. He wants it to be, as you said, free will. He wants it to be something you want to do and that you take joy in doing.
Absolutely.
Unless you're a Calvinist.
I'm not one of those either.
No. No, I was going to say that so often when parents try to force the child into something, they end up pushing them in the opposite direction anyway.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to welcome someone into an idea than it is to force them into an idea.
It's very true. And I think that we see that even within culture, it's one side wants you to believe this certain thing and one side wants you to believe this certain thing. And it's just arguing over who's right instead of having open dialogue to figure out why those differences in thought are there. I mean, in a smaller microcosm of that, I had a discussion with a friend earlier today. I'm still religious. He's not. We went to a faith-based institution together, and I had no idea that he'd left our church. And the discussion, he told me, I was ready to rip into you, but you disarmed me because you were kind and understanding about my questions and why I'm questioning or why I've questioned religion and questioned God. And I thought that was so poignant because too often people who are strong in their beliefs will fight for those beliefs in a way that makes people not listen to them, which is totally counterintuitive to how we're supposed to communicate. Because if you are communicating, the goal is for you to be able to share something. But in order to do that, we have to be able to listen. It's a two-way street.
Right. And listening is very different. It's not waiting for your turn.
Yes.
To speak. It means actually listening to what the other person is saying. True.
Yeah, as a leadership development coach, I often have to teach people how to actively listen and to remember that, listening isn't your opportunity to think about what you're going to say next.
Right.
It's actually
Yeah.
considering the other person's point of view.
Absolutely. And, I think that those breaks, those moments of silence aren't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, obviously we're doing a show here, so we try to fill the silence as much as possible. So there's this kind of dichotomy between can I listen well enough to also make sure that we can fill the silence and not sit here awkwardly for 5 seconds while someone figures out something to say. But no, I think that that's such an important thing. I'm actually getting my master's in educational leadership at the moment, and active listening and skills like that are so important to actually doing that kind of job well.
And it's interesting what you said about silence. Is we are so uncomfortable with it. I was in the radio business for 25 years, and so when we had to, the commercials were coming on at 11:54. At 11:53, 54, 55 seconds is when I would be thinking of the last 2-3 words to say, and I would hit it right on the clock because, like, if you wait 2-3 seconds on live radio, what happened? Did the guy die? Did he have a heart? What happened? He hasn't talked for 3 seconds. Like there's absolute shock. But that's on radio. But in real life, we're so uncomfortable with it. Like they teach you in negotiation to say something. I'd like to have a raise. I'd like to have 20% increase in salary. And stop. Not because I've done this. Go on and on and on and keep talking. Say it. Stop the sentence and just stop there. The other person can't deal with the silence, and they're going to feel it. They're going to say something. The first person to talk loses, right? Because they become unnerved because of the silence. They can't deal with the silence. And this is like not in a conversation. This is like in a negotiation, right? And I had a friend use this on me all the time, like he'd when we'd have a conversation, chatting back and forth about something, and I was about to go out for breakfast across the street at a hotel, and there was silence. And, do you want to go for breakfast? Like I better say something. So like I invited him for breakfast, not because I wanted to invite him for breakfast, but like I couldn't deal with that. That silence was making me nervous. So he'd say something and just stop. Oh, you're going to the hotel? You're having breakfast? Yeah. So when the silence came, I got like too nervous with, and then I noticed, wait, this is happening too often. And then I stayed with it. Like he did this regularly. then I stayed with it. And the silence went on for a long, long, long time because I thought, no, I'm determined. I'm not going to say anything. Then he finally relented.
That's interesting.
It reminds me, on the Tuesday night show, we've been going, my father and I do a Tuesday show and a Saturday show. And on Tuesdays, we've been working our way through the Psalms. And it reminds me that one of them, shoot, I can't remember which one now, but basically says that the silence belongs to the Lord. And that it's something to give to him, as an offering, kind of a thing, that that anticipation in what comes next, which in a religious aspect, obviously, is going to be something like praise and worship, but it made emphasis on the silence. And then, of course, in the Psalms and also in a couple of the other more poetic books, you have that word Selah. Which we take to mean consider what's just been said. And I imagine that would normally be done in silence.
I've always been told that it was a breath, like a space.
A beat.
But that's interesting. Silence as an offering to God. You could almost think of that in terms of prayer, because I think that a lot of people, if they do pray, God, please help me have this or give me this, and then they're done talking. They don't treat it like a conversation.
Right.
There's supposed to be that space for silence to allow him to talk, and you have to train yourself to listen in prayer. And I speak from experience on this, because I'll tell you what, I tend to feel silence there more than anywhere else, because I don't know how to really sit with silence when it's really just pure silence and you're actually waiting to hear something. It's an interesting thought, for sure. I'll have to look up that psalm and keep that in mind.
It's very interesting. Speaking to a lady, speaking about the Psalms, and she was a Jewish lady, and she was saying, "Oh, the Psalms are so beautiful. I wonder why we as Jewish people don't have anything as beautiful as the Psalms." I said, "Hello, they're written by King David. Really? They're not Christian?" I said, "No, they're written by Christian people. Use them as well, but no, they're written by King David." And this same lady, when we were in Italy, in Florence, and she sees Michelangelo's David, and I said, it's interesting that it's to see such an amazing statue of the biblical figure of David. She said, "Well, that's not a Jewish thing." And I said, "Which David do you think it is?" Right? Like, people are not aware of culturally of things like this lady was a rather strange lady. She was when we were in the Vatican Museum. She was saying they have a lot of pictures of the popes in here. I said, "Yes, because it's the Vatican."
Yes.
But what people don't know culturally, right? And at one point she says, "I'm very uncomfortable, with that statue over there. It's like, it's like a child molestation or pedophilia." It was like Madonna and child. She didn't know what, she hadn't had a context of what that was.
I will say I've been to the Vatican. I kind of agreed with her. I kind of agree with her, and I'm coming at that from a Christian perspective. Although some people don't consider me a Christian because I keep the Jewish Sabbath.
Oh, you do?
I do. I do.
How come, if I may ask?
A lot of Christians argue that the law was fulfilled by Jesus when he died on the cross. And I believe that's true in terms of sacrificial law, because if Jesus was the Messiah, then he was the Lamb of God and therefore fulfilled the sacrifices, and we don't need to do those anymore. But the Sabbath was instituted at creation and therefore was never done away with, because it was given to us before the fall of man, and is therefore still a part of what God wants us to do, because it's part of the moral law of the Ten Commandments.
Right. How do you observe it?
Well, I don't work at all on the Sabbath.
Wow.
Unless I'm on duty with my school, because it's a Seventh-day Adventist boarding school.
Yeah.
Occasionally I'm on duty because we have kids here and we need
Right.
supervision, but that's more of a ministry than I'm going out and teaching a class. So I don't work. We live on the campus of the school, so we don't have to drive our car. I mean, if we had to, we would, to go to church, but we go to church. I teach a Sabbath school before the church service. Then we go to church service. We fellowship with the other people at church, and we come home and we usually sleep or spend time in nature. Yeah, it's a rest. And I'll tell you what, I don't know how people who don't observe Sabbath make it through life, because I need that rest.
Right. Well, like I observe the Sabbath myself and don't use. I rest. I used to go to synagogue. I don't like particularly going to synagogue, so I don't go that often anymore. But I keep. I don't. We don't turn on lights on and off. Don't use electricity, etc. And I find it being addicted to social media and my Twitter feed, etc. But for 24 hours, and when it's a Jewish holiday, sometimes 48 hours. And when the Sabbath comes with 2 Jewish holidays, sometimes it can be as much as 72 hours. No Facebook, no Twitter, no nothing. And I can feel the calmness and the lowering of the anxiety. And it's possible to do. And I have a friend who told me that absolutely she could not. She said she couldn't give it up for like an hour or two, never mind for 24 hours, because your brain gets wired in a certain way and you get very used to it. But you're right. It's so necessary to rest, to calm down, to take it easy, to rest, to recharge for the coming week.
Right. I will say we're not quite as strict on like light switches and things like that. Mostly because of Jesus saying in the New Testament that Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So there's this kind of give and take where if it's too much of a burden, then it makes the Sabbath less of a delight. So some Adventists are stricter than others. Like some will say, oh, you can't go swimming or go out and do something like this. But I'm like, I'm not going out to earn a living.
Yes.
I'm going to enjoy the Sabbath day and spend time with God and my family. If I have a service opportunity to go do good, I'll do that. But predominantly, it is a day of rest, of stepping away from the regular patterns of life to honor what God did at creation.
That's the main thing that I do too, in terms of even before I became a little more observant, even when I wasn't that observant, is that work. Like I had a chance to be on a PBS show when I was a radio talk show host in Montreal, a PBS talk show on American television. So as a local Canadian Montreal broadcaster, to be on a big American nationwide, that was a big deal. But it was recorded on Saturday, and tempted, yes, absolutely, I was tempted. And I could not bring myself to do it as I wanted, because it's work. Something I'd be paid for. It's work, and I should not be working on that day. There's no way getting around it. If somebody said, let's go for a walk, I said, if you want to record it Thursday night at 4 a.m, that would be fine. But from Friday night to Saturday night.
From sundown to sundown. I've had to explain that to my publicist about 6 times, and he's been gracious with it, but I have had to turn opportunities down to be on different shows and things like that because of the Sabbath. And I don't regret it, not for a moment, even if it brought me another 100 sales, or repeating customers that would buy every book I ever wrote. It still would not be worth it to give up one Sabbath.
Okay, Zachary, I have to tell you this because this is having like a profound impact on me because like I don't believe that anything happens for no reason. Like there's a reason that you and I were destined to be on this show together at this particular moment in time. It's like a message to me. And basically, this guy is not Jewish and he's respecting the Sabbath. Since I am Jewish, I better like do it like completely properly. Like, what am I thinking? Right. Like how important, like you've emphasized to me how crucial, how important it is. And actually what it like going back to the origin of why we do it, because sometimes you get that forgotten. Oh, it's Shabbos, it's just Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
You forget, wait, like why did this happen? Like how did this come about? And you're absolutely right. And you've like illustrated it to me in like green and pink neon flashing lights that, hello, see how important it's like a message of see how important it is?
Well, I think it's so, so vital. And I think that because it's the only one of the 10 Commandments that has the prefix remember.
Mhm.
It's a covenant relationship.
Yeah.
It's the only one of the 10 Commandments. Now, they're all important, of course. You break one, you break them all. But it's the only one that says remember. And I think it's because God knew that so many of us who worship him would forget.
Uh-huh.
And Christians use the idea that Jesus rose on Sunday to justify worshiping on Sunday. And I mean, there's no law against worshiping on Sunday, and it's not a bad thing to worship God every day. But only the seventh day was commanded in the Bible.
Yeah, and what's interesting, what I've heard in some of the classes I've attended, is that the holiness is attached to the Saturday, to the Sabbath, and that the other religions, the daughter religions of Judaism, Christianity and Islam, want to hold on to it and be close to that holiness. So they sandwich in Sunday. It's like right after that. And
Friday.
Islam sandwiches Friday. It's like they want to draw from that holiness of the centerpiece, which is Saturday. And the Ten Commandments came first. They came before Christianity and they came before Islam.
Right. Well, even Jesus said that not one jot nor one tittle would pass from the law until all of heaven and earth had passed away, which he's basically saying that they're lasting forever.
Right.
Because heaven and earth will not be done away with. I mean, we, of course, in Christianity, well, in Seventh-day Adventism, believe that the earth will be made new eventually, but it's still the earth. Mm-hmm. It's still the creation that God made, and just because he recreates it doesn't change anything about the gifts that he gave us at creation. I believe very strongly that he gave us marriage and he gave us the Sabbath, but he gave us the Sabbath even before he gave us marriage. So that was the first gift we got.
Well, it depends. It depends. I actually tend to lean toward us still being in day 6. So in a sense, he hasn't given us the Sabbath yet. But
yes, no, I caught myself on that. I was like, no. He created both man and woman on Friday.
Yeah.
So no, marriage, and then when he rested, it was on the 7th day after creation had been completed. Yeah. I'm tired, so I mean a little bit of an error.
Okay. I understand. It's been a long day for me too. Yeah, it's been a busy week all in all. But
Yes.
Yeah. No, this is a really interesting conversation. I was reminded hearing. I've heard it both. My father is a chaplain, retired now from the military, and he's been a minister and both minister and a chaplain, and and all. And I've heard
Mine's
people say to him, yeah, or say near him, not necessarily to him, that they don't believe anybody should work on Sundays, and hearing his little chuckle because that most people consider that that's the one day out of the week that a minister actually works, which isn't true. Because that's the old joke. It's like I wish I wish I could have a job like the minister and only have to work for an hour on one day a week. But yeah, and because the whole idea of the Sabbath wasn't to not do anything or to do nothing, but to do something else, to worship and study and give it to God. Um, and most Christians don't observe that on Saturday. Of course, most the vast majority of Christians celebrating worship and such on Sundays, but which and some people will say that that's a later adoption, but it's actually mentioned in the New Testament that people worship on Sundays. Revelation comes to mind where he says that he was where John says that he was in prayer on the Lord's Day, and referring to Sunday.
The Lord's,
yeah.
And what makes Sunday the Lord's Day?
Right.
When the New Testament also says that Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath,
right.
Wouldn't that make the Sabbath the Lord's Day?
No, because that's the Sabbath. The Lord's Day meaning the day that the Lord rose from the dead.
That is a very, and I don't want to get into a religious debate, but that is a new interpretation of that.
Okay.
One of the things, and I'd like your opinion on this, one of the teachings of the Hasidic part of Judaism 200-300 years ago is that it's not that God created the world and then
right.
it's done and took off, that he still pays attention to every detail, and that he in fact, like a table isn't a table, it's like, atoms and molecules, etc., that in order for the world to exist, that he must keep creating it every second. In other words, that it's he's creating, it's not that he created it and then was done. It's an ongoing process. It's a process. He's creating it even as we speak. Every little detail, he's creating every fiber of this notebook, of my finger, of the screen, of absolutely everything. So when I heard this teaching, a question occurred to me. I said, if that is correct, I said, if that's true, then we also have to accept that he was creating every second of the Zyklon B gas that was used to gas men, women, and children in the concentration camps. You can't say, well, no, he didn't do. He was like out of town for that. You can't say that. So that's a tough concept. That's tough to deal with, and I guess that explains, because we don't understand everything. If we did, we'd be God. So we don't understand everything. We have understanding, a deep understanding, but nonetheless a limited understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
That's such just I mean, that's an interesting concept. I don't think that I think of it necessarily the same way. Hebrews 11:1 says that now faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. The word substance there in the original Greek in which Paul wrote it meant like the substance, like the actual stuff that holds existence together. So I don't know that I would think of it in terms of God constantly recreating the universe every moment, but that he does hold it together. But I mean, that's still kind of a difficult concept when you think of like the gas or like suffering in general. And I actually was having part of this conversation with my friend earlier with because his big reason why he left the church was suffering. But I think that suffering itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. Pain isn't necessarily a bad thing, I should say, because when it's working well and you can't avoid further pain, a little bit of pain lets you know that you need to back away and avoid further harm. But because of free will and the fall of man and God's insistence on following his own rules and respecting that free will, we have people inflicting pain on others, which is horrible, but he can't break his own law and force someone to stop doing something just because it hurts him and the people he loves.
But what would your answer be to, according, I don't know, I don't know if Christianity feels the same way about it, but Judaism does. The expression is kvar yachol, is that God is omnipotent, all-knowing, all-seeing, and it can do absolutely anything. So if he can do absolutely anything, he could find another way to arrange, like you just said, if it's pain, gives you a system to avoid, back away so it shouldn't get worse. Since we're not capable of creating anything, but he is, could he have not created a system where you would get that warning without that pain and suffering? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not, you know.
Yeah.
It'd be kind of,
You know,
it might be a little, what would be the opposite of humble? One would probably have to be a little full of themselves to offer up a complete answer to such a thing. But
Right.
but I think it goes back to the fall, really, that that God did give us an option to have a pain-free life. But Adam and Eve chose to disobey, and this was simply the consequence.
Right. Well, because the curse is pain. Because perfection is unity with God, and imperfection is pain and disunity. Because I don't know how Judaism interprets what sin actually is, but I had a wonderful opportunity to listen to a pastor who talked about sin being literal nothingness, because God fuels and keeps existence running. And if the wages of sin are in fact death, as scripture teaches, death is just non-existence. It's not, you'd go somewhere else. It's just a complete lack of existence. So the fall separated us from God, starting that process of pulling away from existence. That has to be a painful experience in and of itself. So, I mean, these are the questions that philosophers have struggled with
Right.
for centuries.
Yes,
Why is
and
there
we're going to
suffering?
resolve
Why
it here in the next 15 minutes.
Yes, that's right.
Right. We have all that talent and all that brain power.
That's right.
Yeah, we can figure it out.
I think that, at a certain point, and it's not to say that that's not an important question, one that we should wrestle with. And I think that people who don't worship God and people who worship God need to ask those questions, because we need to understand, okay, how much of this am I willing to accept on faith? How much of this am I willing to understand that I can't understand?
Right.
That I could study and discuss this for decades and not know the answers why until I'm able to ask this question face to face.
Right.
So I think at a certain point, it has to come down to personal experience. Like, I'm utterly convinced of my own religion, not because of philosophical questions like these, which I enjoy discussing, but because I have seen his hand work intimately in my life, and I can't deny, because I don't believe in coincidences, I can't deny how he has worked and guided my life So I can't deny his existence or that the things that he says about himself are true.
One of the most amazing things, a great piece of wisdom that came from the head of the Lubavitch movement, the Lubavitcher Rebbe in Brooklyn, who died about 25 years ago. He was asked about the Holocaust. What was the reason? What was the reason for the Holocaust? Now you have a number of people who said, well, it was because Jews were too assimilated. It was because, and so, which was the people in the cattle cars were completely assimilated, had given up Judaism or extremely religious, one next to the other. His answer to it, in other words, what's the reason for the Holocaust? I think he came up with the wisest answer I've ever heard. And he said, we don't know. And I think that's the only acceptable answer. We don't know what the reason was. And I think that, like you said, when face to face, you can ask him directly. But anybody who's saying, like a lot of people say, well, God, it's like they become religious on certain things. Like I couldn't care less about sports and the Olympics. So I'm quite willing to say that, that's terrible, then that's anti-religious and it's idol worship and you should have nothing to do with watching the Olympics. But don't tell me to give up Netflix. Right? So it's like I'm going to protect the temptations that I have, but I'm quite willing to forbid the temptations that the next guy has. Oh, that is terrible, shouldn't do that. Right? It's easy to do that, right? So you're right. These questions, there has to be a lot that's accepted on faith, and you're right about there not being coincidences.
Right.
I think that things happen for a reason.
Coincidences, we can open ourselves up to a whole world of possibilities where chance things just happen, and that leads you down the road of eventually trying to believe in evolution, which, I mean, you look at certain animals and they just could not have evolved. Like they had to exist exactly as they are or they would have died. Well, even like the valves in a giraffe's neck there are valves that open and close depending on the position of a giraffe's neck so that it will get enough blood flow when it's standing up straight, but so that its brain isn't drowned and oversaturated in blood. There's a sponge-like material at the base of its of the occipital lobe that absorbs the blood when it's bent down to drink, so that the delicate capillaries between neurons don't burst while he's taking a drink. And then that blood slowly disperses back into the brain when he stands back up again. That's not something that can evolve over, hundreds of millions of years. That has to be right there at the moment the giraffe is alive or it dies.
As we give up the silence to the Lord.
Yeah.
Psalm 65.
Psalm 65. I'm going to write that down.
No, back to suffering, because that's a much easier topic than evolution. I've always said that. Well, maybe not always. I'm sure there was a time I didn't say it, but I've often said that the why of a thing is not in the past or even in the present, but in the future. And so the people, as they went through things like the Holocaust, or I myself was in an industrial fire and got second and third degree burns as a result of that. The why was not in that moment as to why did this horrible thing happen? Why did I suffer so? And it certainly wasn't in the past. The how, you can look back to find out how something happened. Look at all the bits and pieces of Hitler's life and and all the people who were involved in the in that particular genocide and World War II, and getting all that off the ground, to figure out how it went to there. But to find out the why, you have to look into the future of it. Now, of course, much of that future is in my past as to why did that fire happen. Part of it was because at the time I was trying to be an auto mechanic, and I thought that it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, and I thought that was what I was put on this earth to do, and so I was pushing forward no matter what. And then the fire happened, and I couldn't work on a car for 8 hours a day because my hands just wouldn't do it. And so I still enjoy wrenching on cars every now and again, but it's not something I can do for 8 hours a day, 5 days out of the week, or however many hours I might have been working. And so you look at all the different things, and I was eventually led to business school and leadership practices, and learning how to be a leadership developer, and coming up with all sorts of things surrounding that, to the point where I am today, having helped people become better at what they do, and the same thing with my divorce, that pushed me back down to Santa Ana, the family home, and back to the old family church that members of my my ancestors had been going to since 1949, which got me involved in the church's radio ministry, which led me to having a podcast, which led us to having this discussion right now.
All those chains of events.
All those chains of events. The why was in the future of the suffering. There's still why to come. There's plenty of why left for me, and you guys too. As we move forward through life, we'll see that. We just need to pay attention.
That's so true. I mean, I was listening to that story that you told, and I'm thinking, wow, that's kind of similar to what's happened to me even just this year. Because the last time we talked, I wasn't teaching. I was kind of doing side work and writing Eternity's Refuge. And then this summer we moved to Colorado, and we were living with my parents at the time. And I was still doing side work. I was doing Instacart. I got my real estate license. And I got to the point, it was close to the beginning of the school year. I wasn't planning on teaching this year. And the harder I prayed, the less money I made doing Instacart. I couldn't find any clients to work with on either buying or selling a house. And I broke down and I thought, okay, well, I'm going to apply to Walmart. So they were going to hire me to be a service writer in their auto center in the town that we were living in Colorado. And there was an issue with my social security number, which was weird because I'd worked for Walmart in the past when I was an undergrad student. And I thought, well, this is so weird. It's the week before school started here at the school that I'm employed at now. And I broke down and thought, let me apply to some teaching jobs because I don't have a job. I'm not making any money. It seemed like every day the pay that I would earn doing Instacart would cut in half. And I'm like, I'm praying. I don't know what's going on. Had no idea why. I applied to all of the Adventist teaching jobs that were available on our website. And I think I'm not going to hear from a single one of these principals. I had an interview later that day.
Wow.
Now, it wasn't at the school that I actually got hired at. I had the interview for this one the day after on Thursday, because that was a Wednesday. I was hired on Friday. School started Monday. The day after. And it was such an intricate working of details. At registration, before school started, parents were threatening to pull their kids out unless they had a physical math teacher in the classroom actually working with them to teach them. So we kept about 10 students that we could not lose because we have a small student population that we're trying to build back up. Only because of God's intervention could I possibly have been here. And it's been such a blessing because even though my wife is working, we don't need her to. So when we have children, she can decide to stay home if she wants to. And because our house is on campus, I can be very involved and will not have to be more than a quarter mile from my children at any given moment.
Wow.
So we are very blessed and very happy with how that's worked out.
Awesome.
How long have you been married?
It will be 3 years in February.
And does your wife also share your views on the Sabbath?
We met at a Seventh-day Adventist high school, so yes, both our fathers were Adventist ministers. My dad is working as a chaplain now, and so is her father, but they've both been pastors. My dad actually grew up in the mission field in Brazil, and so his first language was Portuguese. About fourth or fifth generation of Adventist on his side. I'm the only one that's not a pastor, though. I still work for the church as a teacher. It's just not quite the same thing.
Not quite. Yeah, teaching is mentioned separately from preaching in the Bible. So yeah.
It's although, I mean, of course, Tommy, that rabbi means teacher. So
Right.
a big part of that is sharing. Of course, for a rabbi, it's religion and the teachings of the Torah and the other Jewish writings. But I think there's a lot of overlap between what a teacher and what a pastor does. We just do it in very different ways and for different reasons.
For sure, there's very different foci.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's your take on the mix in the United States of religion and politics?
It's dangerous. I mean, I do think that there are certain moral imperatives that go beyond any one religion, and the idea that people are forcing their religion on people by recognizing those moral imperatives is kind of ridiculous. But I guess it's a difficult discussion because you can argue that morals as a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim would see them because of the roots of our faiths might be forcing religion on someone because an atheist doesn't believe that morals actually exist as a constant. So it's a weird discussion.
Yes, yeah.
I don't think that any one religion or worldview should be endorsed by the government because we get into trouble doing that. I mean, the atrocities committed against people because of the Holy Roman Empire is evidence of that.
Oh yeah.
But at the same time, there are certain things that are true regardless of whether you worship God or not. So it's a tough question to answer.
Yeah. I think that for the most part, if your religion is more than just lip service, then obviously it's going to inform whatever it is you do. And of course, if you believe that your religion is a good thing, then you're certainly going to want to share that with others. That would kind of be an imperative because it's like, hey, my religion is really good for me. And while I don't want to force it on somebody, I certainly want to tell you about it. I mean, I have 4 programs a week in some way or another, I let people know about my faith. I'm in charge of the multimedia for broadcast for my church on Sunday mornings.
Mm-hmm.
Which is also funny because that's another funny story. Let me make a note. If we have another silence, we can bring it up. But yeah, and so I would think that if I got into politics, that would inform my politics as well. Certainly, there are some things that I'd have to steer clear of, but it's like I think it should be important enough to the person in politics for it to inform and direct their actions, but not in a way that forces their beliefs on the other individuals who are affected by them. Like the whole thing with prayer in schools. That's a big one, because it's like, whose prayer would you say then if you're going to force prayer in school? Are you going to have one prayer for everyone? And which prayer, what religion, what faith's prayer is it going to be? Or are you going to do it by region? It's like, oh, okay, well, this region is more populated by Jewish believers, so we'll have a Jewish prayer there. Or this area here is more populated by Catholic believers, so we're going to have a different prayer there, or what have you. Or do it school by school. And so really, because it becomes so complicated there, you can't really force prayer in schools, but you can certainly allow it.
Right. I think what one of the solutions that someone came up with, again, it was, I think, the Lubavitch Rebbe who came up with it, was precisely because you can't force the Catholic to say the Jewish prayer, the Jewish person to say the Catholic prayer, right? So in other words, like, to insist to have a private, like a moment of basically of silence, yes, where the person engages in spiritually with whoever in whatever way he wants. So dealing with it in every personal way. The Muslim would deal with it in one way, the Jewish person, the Catholic person another way, and it allows it includes the atheist person in it as well, who's also at the school, to deal with it in whichever way they see fit. It's like Alcoholics Anonymous uses, a lot of it has to do with the belief in God and saying, or whatever the entity you would call it. Some people
is the
right, higher power. People don't want to call it this. They're alienated or triggered by this word or that word or that word. So whatever it means to you, I think that makes sense. I think you said something, Bill, that was very interesting. You said that if you're somebody who believes in it, you're doing more than lip service, right? You're taking this seriously. Mm-hmm. This has deep meaning for you. That you behave in a certain way. You may still make mistakes, but you behave in a certain way. And I think one of the ways we've seen, because people can use a religion to make themselves appear something when they're not, and the way to be able to tell that is, how much do they belittle others? In other words, how nasty are they about people who are different, look taller, shorter, different, how mean and nasty do they get about that? That'll give you, I think, some, not a perfect indication, but some indication of how seriously they take it. Because to say, I'm very religious, that takes 1 second, and it doesn't mean it may be true and it may be a complete lie. So just saying it has no value. If it is something that's deep and you take that you take seriously, that has meaning.
Mm-hmm. I think that actions speak a lot louder than words.
Yeah.
And the way in which you use words plays a big part too, because someone could quote the Bible but use it to justify something abhorrent. Mm-hmm. which I've seen people do within politics. I'm like, one, you shouldn't be preaching religion at me because you're in a position of political power. And two, you're using it to justify something absolutely and completely disgusting that you should not use religion to justify or to support. And that's where a lot of these politicians lose me. It's like, I cannot take you seriously if you don't know the spirit of what you're quoting. So yes, lip service. So you're using all the nice, pretty words, but you don't know what they mean. And that's a big difference, I think.
Or you do know what they mean and you're just lying. You know, you just cover it.
It's words, because that's blasphemy.
Yeah, you're just covering up. You know that, you know, if I do this, it'll look good. I mean, I'll be able to get away with more.
I'll be able to attract the whatever group it is that that agrees with that, and by denigrating the others, if you will.
Right, and you know, I found this fascinating. I've never heard this before either. We have a new a lady who's our housekeeper here in the country place in Eastern Townships, and she describes herself as a lapsed Catholic, and she said that she gave up on Catholicism. She said a lot of people in her family and in her neighborhood did. She said because of a lot of the scandals involving the priests, and one of the things she said was that they'd been told in the parishes here in Quebec not to put in coins in the collection plate because it makes noise, so to put in paper because that's silent. But I mean, some people could only afford, we're talking about the 30s and 40s, 50s, like a penny or 5 cents or 10 cents, like paper meant $1. Right. So that would be difficult. So I found that shocking, you know, that was the case. But I'd never heard that before. But so there are people who use religion, who've used religion in the past to make money or to commit horrendous crimes, and it takes a while for that all to surface and to figure it out. And one of the horrors of it, especially I'm sure for the victims, is that when somebody was not suspected of it, but caught in the act, like repeated number of times, and it caused all this trauma to a whole number of people, that instead of being sent for therapy possibly or something like that, just switched to another parish, to another school where there are other children who were victimized by it. And when I first heard about these stories, you figure, oh, well, it's 1 in a billion. Like, oh, yes, it's a horrible story, but it never happens. Or if it happens, it's extremely, extremely rare. Then you found out it was less rare. And even Hollywood discovered, right, that this kind of thing happens and it's not good. And with the whole Me Too movement, like that was just a change of morality even within Hollywood. In others, it used to be called the casting couch and was a perfectly acceptable thing. Like, you do this for me, I do this for you. It's just a business deal, and that's perfectly fine. And it's only much, much later that morality said, no, you can't exchange that for that. That's wrong to do. You're in a position of power. The other person isn't. And that a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 16-year-old, even if they quote unquote use the language and acquiesce at that age, they're too young to acquiesce. That's not acquiescence. But it took a while to come around to that.
And it's still very much a problem. We live in a world where I think that we I see in the way that things are approached that it looks to me that there's a war going on in the spiritual realms that we're not necessarily aware of unless we're paying direct attention to it, that is attacking families and children. The institutions that God created and wants to protect are the things that are being attacked the hardest.
And the people attacking them are in so often in positions of great trust.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember, and I'm not going to name names because I don't want people to go looking for this person necessarily, but I was in my rare delving into the news, there was a politician that stated that the reason people are concerned about inflation is because they're having children and they don't want them. And I'm like, well, what a horrible thing to say, is that children are unwanted and they're financial burdens, and that they shouldn't be having children because they're expensive. I mean, sure, it's expensive to raise kids, but to say that you shouldn't have them, or that we should somehow get rid of all pregnancies because of an inflation problem, it seems to me that we should be enabling people to have the children that they want, not
Right. To make it
just
easier for
the
them.
wholesale destruction or of family values just because it's expensive. Let's fix the expense problem, not the we don't want to have new people around
Right.
thing.
And also not having new people around means you're going to be over pretty quickly.
All
And
right.
like Japan and Canada, I think have the oldest populations. I mean, they're not reproducing. The death rate is higher than the birth rate, and there's a finite amount of time that can continue.
Right. And the only way that that's fixed is either by bringing more immigrants in from the countries that are growing, or we recognize that in order to keep the population up, we have to honor and respect family values. You know, I don't really care about like taxes and things like that as long as they don't overstep. But I do think that at the core of what the government is supposed to protect is the family, because that is the primary unit of politics, because families create society and society creates.
Right. And I think we've learned that also there are different kinds of families. It's not just one specific kind of family unit. We were neighbors with this. Um, when my father passed away, he was an elderly Holocaust survivor at the synagogue. When I was saying the Kaddish prayer for him, I was seated next to another elderly Hungarian Holocaust survivor. So it was God's way of sort of like, I've taken one away from you, I'm giving you another one to sort of take care of you for a while. And he introduced me to his, on Saturday night, I was over at his house after the Sabbath, and he introduced me to his daughter. And they said, somebody later said, "Oh, you met Shalama? Yes, she's very sweet, she's very nice. She has 16 children." I said, "No, she doesn't." I said, "Yeah, no, she does." I said, "No, I was sitting across the table from her. She doesn't have a line on her face. It is impossible for her to have 16 children." Anyway, yes, she does. We went to her house for dinner almost every Friday night for a number of years. I learned, I don't know them anymore, but I learned the names of each of the 16 kids. And she was as happy as can be. And the older ones were taking care of teaching the middle ones how to take care of the younger ones, and everything sort of, the older one was cooking this and that. Like it all worked quite well. And they had very little money. This was not a wealthy family in the least. And then one of my best interviews that I ever did on radio, I only got half of what I wanted to achieve. Met this lady who had 10 children, and I knew her daughter who also had 10 children.
Oh,
So
wow.
I wanted to interview the mother and the daughter together, right? And both said no. And then I used guilt. I said, yeah, okay, you're happy. You're running a nice, happy family. Everything's okay with you. Eh, who cares? If somebody's listening and they're thinking if they should have children or not, it's too much trouble to have a hassle, and they're going to decide against having a child. You don't care about that, right? And all right, all right, all right. So the daughter didn't come; she was too shy. But the mother came, and I interviewed her, and everybody on the radio was listening was, wow, like what a great mom. And she said, like there are sacrifices you have to do, and there's great joys, etc. And and the thing is, there are other people who can't. Not everyone can do that. Not every woman can deal with 16 children. Not everyone can deal with 3. But a lot of the calls came in saying, wow, I have 3 kids and it's tough and everything, but she sounded terrific. Like, I'm going to take her advice. It was great to hear the things she had to say. And what was remarkable about her, this woman was very religious, had nothing to do with media or social media at all. And she was an natural on the radio, because she was herself. She talked like she did at her dinner table. That's how she talked on the radio. So she was very warm and sincere, and did a fabulous job. And I said, you don't know how many people's minds you could have changed. I said, it was not by accident, like we were saying before, that nothing is by accident. It's not by accident that you decided that A, that I asked you, and B, that you decided, okay, I will do it. Nothing in it for you. She didn't need media exposure in any way. There's something in it for me because it was an interesting show. But I said, there's a lot in it for the people who were listening. You may have had a profound impact on some of the listeners.
I think that's true, because there's this whole movement about being child-free, and I respect some people deciding that they don't want to have children. I think if you know you don't like kids, you should not be a parent.
Right.
But I think that a lot of people, especially young people, are afraid of it, partially because of growing up during the Great Recession of 2008, moving forward during that time period. And they want to be able to have things that they didn't have as kids or young adults. But I think that there's a lot of beauty in giving of yourself for the benefit of others. And I think that we've lost a lot of that altruism and the value in that altruism today. And I think we need to regain that and reclaim what made Western civilization great once we had kind of done away with our marrings of slavery and things like that. We need to go back to the core values of self-sacrifice for the benefit of others. I think that's something that we've lost, and it's something that's so important to give of oneself.
Problem with selfishness. It really is. Most of it comes down. Most of the things that are wrong with the world come down to a self-centered attitude. You know, you know, in our religious context, we may call it sin. In another context, we just may call it self-centeredness.
Narcissism.
Yeah. And I think really at the core, everybody is essentially selfish, self-centered. It just depends on whether or not you see the other people as being of benefit to you. The argument from an ethics standpoint would be egoism versus enlightened egoism, to use the more technical terms. And to be self-centered, or to realize that a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think that's something that we need to work on helping other people recognize that my neighbor's good is my good.
Right.
In a certain extent, I think that's a stepping stone to something maybe even bigger, because and I forget what book it's in. I think it might be in Matthew or Mark. But Jesus instructs his followers to esteem others as better than themselves.
Yeah.
So the idea that not only should we be treating people well, but we should be treating them, trying to outdo each other in honor, doing as much as we can, because we are supposed to actually believe that the people around us are better. Like that was the whole point of the way in which Jesus was born, coming down and humbling himself, being the Son of God in heaven, to being a human on earth, born into a poor family. He didn't come as anyone was expecting him to come, as a conquering hero. That was what they were looking for when the Romans were occupying Israel and Judah. But he came in a humble way and died believing that so much that redemption for humanity was better than holding on to the riches and the glory of heaven. He gave all that up to do that. And of course, he regained it, and he's a conquering king. At least that's what we believe. But if that, because of course I'm going to live my life with that as my example. So I have to, if I'm going to try to be Christ-like, I have to think of others as better than myself, as deserving of my time and my effort, because someone far greater than me gave his very life that I might exist and regain what was lost because of my own choices.
Well, that's part of the reason why humility is one of the core values I teach in my leadership program. One of the actions, humility and vulnerability. Because that's to give a secret, a secret I very poorly keep is that my leadership program is actually based on the Beatitudes. But I don't normally tell people that because it's a turnoff for some. And
because people hate Christians, but they hate the worship
I tell
of
them
God.
afterward. After the program's done and it's a success and all that, then I tell people, oh, by the way, this is where you got that. Welcome aboard.
Right. Well, I mean, it's true, because like even in the ending of his ministry at the Last Supper, Jesus wasn't, giving them instructions and bossing them around. He washed their feet, which was something that a servant did. It's where we get the idea of servant leadership. That's where that concept has come from. And that was a huge part of even my own instruction in leadership, because I've done some of those trainings, and I've been in leadership roles before, and a large part of the teaching on how to do that was approaching it as service to those that you're leading.
Yeah, and it's a pity when politicians have not figured that out, that there's a reason they're called public servants.
Yes. I see it time and time again. The corruption that we have in the government is because people are lining their pockets and using this as a way to get rich rather than as a way to enrich other people's lives. I don't think that we need term limits.
Yeah.
Well, I have no problem with people benefiting themselves, as long as they're benefiting others to at least the same degree.
I think that their self-benefit needs to be a byproduct, not something that they are intentionally seeking.
Well, this country was founded by people who were self-seeking. Benjamin Franklin got a bunch of things changed so that he could be appointed as the postmaster general. So he got laws made and things done and all that so that he could make sure that the Pennsylvania Gazette was delivered to every home in the colonies, which it was eventually because he was Postmaster General. And of course, there was a common good that came from that. And people were informed, and we ended up getting this great nation of ours. But yeah, the people who founded this country were self-seeking, were self-serving, but they certainly
I
weren't
won't
leaving
argue
others
with you
behind.
because it's your show, but
Yeah.
I mean, my family has been here since the Mayflower. I mean, I'm the child of
Whoa.
immigrants. I'm also, yeah. Um,
Whoa.
I'm Heinz 57. I'm classic American because I'm third generation American, but I've also have blood that's been here since the Mayflower landed. So all stages of American history where my family has landed at different times, and I'm sort of the result of a lot of different American success stories. But my great grandmother was a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, and
Oh, wow.
yeah, and the Mayflower Society and a bunch of other stuff.
Oh,
Did a
wow.
lot of genealogy research. Even had
That's
someone that
incredible.
was
That
yeah,
stuff
even had someone
fascinates
that was killed during the Salem witch trials, which
Okay.
was interesting.
Oh, my God.
But I feel very strongly that the morals and the values that our founding fathers had were not self-seeking. Um, and I have a great respect for what our country was founded on, and I want to return to those values.
Did you know about the Cincinnati Society, the Society of the Cincinnati?
Cincinnati.
It's a little museum in Washington, and
Mm.
it's for descendants of the Daughters of the American Revolution.
Oh, that's interesting. I actually did not know that.
Yeah, they're only open, like, in order to qualify as a museum, they have to be open. It's private, but in order to get funding, they have to be public somewhat. So they're only open a certain amount of hours per week.
Mhm.
And it's called the Cincinnati Society, and we got a tour of it. It was phenomenal. They were part of the Daughters of the American Society. I can't believe 2 hours have gone by. This has
Oh,
been
Yeah,
tremendous.
yeah, it usually works that way. When it's not working that way, we end early.
Oh, okay. Oh, good. Well, so I'm glad it worked well.
Yes.
Absolutely.
But no, I'm not saying anything. By saying that they were self-serving or self-seeking, I'm not meaning to denigrate them. They did great and
Okay.
impressive things that have benefited us all. Um, but I'm not excluding the benefit that they got themselves. They were not altruistic,
Right.
Right.
if you will allow me to use such a word.
I think a couple of them probably were. I will say not all of them were, because there are some founding fathers that were definitely less than scrupulous. Um,
You get a
I
bad
don't
apple
think
in every batch.
bad or all good by any means, but I do think that there were a couple really good men among them.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that. I hope my battery continues with my.
Well,
My iPad.
mentioning Cincinnatus, George Washington's often been compared to him, to Cincinnatus. Having his 2 terms, giving it up, and going home, much like the ancient Roman. Yeah, Cincinnatus was Roman. Did, and that set a precedent that continued through World War II until FDR. But
He actually formalized the 2-term limit because of
because of
FDR
FDR, yeah,
and his hubris in running for 4 terms.
yeah, for sure. But that's why Teddy Roosevelt didn't do a second term, was because he didn't want to. He considered his first partial term to be his first term, and so after he was elected, he gave it up And but then after he was disappointed in Taft, decided he wanted to run again, but it just wasn't going to happen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he did serve a good majority of that first partial term.
Yeah.
So it made sense that he honored that. But I mean, if we start talking about history, we can talk quite a bit.
We'll have another 2 hours.
We'll have another 2 hours.
Yes.
And then I'll be at midnight.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'm close enough to that now in Central Time that I should probably sign off and go to bed.
I'm thinking it's time to let you guys go.
This was great.
It has been. It really has been. I hope it does as well as last week's show. Because people should hear
so
this.
even with all the religious stuff, I think they're important questions to ask, even if you're not Christian or Jewish, or I know some people think I'm in a cult. I'm really not, but it's because of the Sabbath thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There are a few things we could discuss, but we won't.
It was great to meet you both.
The pleasure was truly all mine.
I think we all share in that pleasure. It was a great conversation.
It was. It was. So in that case, since it's so late, I'll go ahead and let you guys go. And I will run the end credits. Promotions time. Let's see, Zachary, what's your website again?
ZacharyHagenWrites.com. Okay. That's ZacharyHagen Writes.com.
I will put that in the description so people can go, and when your pre-sale goes live, then they'll be able to go and buy lots of your books.
That'd be great. We're excited. First Horizons is really excited to put out the book. So
awesome.
And my website is talkradiotommy.com. Talkradiotommy, all one word, talkradiotommy.com. And the book is called Makeup Tips from Auschwitz, How Vanity Saved My Mother's Life.
That's awesome.
I'll have to pick that up because that sounds so interesting.
Yeah, it does. The title makes it so, I think.
Right, and it's available in audiobook too
as
well. Hardcover, softcover, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, everywhere you can order a book.
Okay, cool.
Fantastic.
All right, gentlemen. That's it. I've stopped asking the hot dog question. I used to ask everybody whether a hot dog was a sandwich or not. But when somebody came out and said that it was a taco, I decided that was time. That it was time.
Yeah, that was the end.
Yeah.
I think they're right.
Kinda. All right, you guys, go away. I'm gonna run the end credits.
Take care.
You too.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. This has been a presentation of Bald Spots Productions. I'd like to thank my producer, my beloved mother, Eileen Hatch. I, of course, am your humble host. I'd like to thank my special guests, Tommy Schnurmacher and Zachary Hagen. Please, if you feel so led, support the show over on Patreon. We're there as Bald Spots Pro. And don't miss YWL Online. It airs on Tuesdays and Saturdays. We'd certainly love to have you. And tune in next time on Saturday afternoon for Erica Ann. Oh, that went by really fast. Please like, comment, and share to stay informed. Subscribe, follow, whatever it is you got to do to kick that algorithm into gear and help us reach more people, because that's what we're trying to do. So thanks again, and have yourselves a wonderful whenever.